All right, in this lesson here, what we're going to do is take a look at the viewports inside of 3ds Max. Now, as I mentioned in the last lesson, basically these viewports are kind of windows into the virtual world in which you'll be building your 3D objects, or 3D scenes, if you will.
Absolutely.
Now, when you first launch up Max, you've got these 4 viewports looking at you. You've got a perspective view, and you can always tell up in the corner which viewport it is because there's some text up there or a label. We've got a left view, a top view, and a front view. You'll also notice following us around is this big thick yellow border, and this is indicating which viewport is currently the active viewport. And you can only have one viewport active at a time. And another thing to make note about is that you can only have 4 viewports visible at one time. You can't have more than 4. Now, there are all sorts of different configurations that we can put these viewports in, and we'll take a look at those in a few minutes. Now, right now, we've got 2 different types of viewports that we're looking at. We have a perspective viewport and we have orthographic viewports. Let's take a look. If I was to come over here and create a sphere, and let's create a little box, something like that.
Very nice box.
Well, thank you. It took some skill to do that.
Yes.
Now, we can see the difference quite quickly. Basically, the perspective view is giving us more of the type of view that we're used to seeing looking through our own eyes, that is, into the world.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So, just a perspective, a real-world type view.
Right.
This is also a distorted view. Tell us what I mean.
Well, what Buzz means by that is, like, if you were to take 2 parallel lines in the real world and look at them, those lines would eventually converge into the distance to a single point. Now, that's what you're going to see in the perspective view, because it actually has depth. Now, inside of an orthographic view, 2 such lines would never converge. They would continue to go parallel on into infinity.
Exactly. Making these guys non-objective viewports. These are really handy when you want to, it's like doing schematic work, and your schematic's giving you, this is how it is. It's
right.
Just black and white.
Well, actually, Buzz said it best when he said that the perspective view is actually distorted, because when you go to the orthographic views, you lose that distortion. So, just as an example, if we were building a 30-story building, and we look at it from the top, I mean, anybody who's ever stood on top of a large building, people look like ants when you look down from it. It's kind of hard to see what things look like, but you won't have that when you look down from a top orthographic view.
Right, it's like it's a 2D flat drawing, basically,
exactly.
Like a schematic drawing. And we're also seeing right now that basically these objects are being represented in different ways. Right now in the perspective view, these objects are shaded, while over here these objects are in what is known as a wireframe view. But we'll talk about those in just a minute. Another thing that's handy to know about these viewports is that you can also come and click on this bar that's separating all the viewports from one another, just to simply drag out a viewport to make one larger, other one smaller, whatever configuration you need.
Okay.
And we'll be talking about different layouts here in a few minutes.
That's very cool.
But if you go about doing this, all you need to do is simply come in, right-click on that bar anywhere, and then hit Reset Layout to set it back to default.
Cool.
Okay? For me to go around and change what viewport is active, all I need to do is simply click in another viewport. But how you click may be important.
Yes.
Check this out. If I click to select this sphere right here, and I come down here and I want to make this viewport active for whatever reason, and I left-click, not only did I make the viewport active, I also deselected this sphere. That's right. So what I always like to do is simply middle-click to make another viewport active. That way there's no accidents that happen.
Very cool.
Okay, so the next thing I want to do is go ahead and talk about how we go about doing viewport navigation. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner down here, you'll remember that in the UI section, I mentioned it quickly that we had viewport navigation controls. Now let's take a quick look at how they work. First icon right here is a magnifying glass, hence zooming.
Yes.
So to zoom in, we simply click it, and you'll notice that the button is now staying depressed, and it is yellow, just like when we create objects, how those stay pressed in yellow, indicating that this tool is staying active as we just kind of travel around the different viewports here. And you can see we're zooming out, zooming in. Just so easy, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's right. Now, at any point, as I go along these different tools down here, if I want to deactivate the tool, all I need to do is simply right-click. And you'll notice that I'm now back to a regular mouse pointer and that there's nothing active down here.
Okay.
So moving right along from our zoom icon, we'll move over to the zoom all icon. Anytime you see an icon that's got this red 4-way grid in the background, that's indicating that you're going to affect all of your viewports. So this zoom all means that I am going to zoom all 4 viewports.
No matter which one is active.
You got it.
Very cool.
All right, so moving right along from that one, we've got zoom extents. And right now it's actually been changed from its default. So I'm going to go ahead and change it back to its default. And you'll notice there's a little triangle down here. So that's kind of the giveaway, if you will.
Right. So
indicating it's a fly out. That's right. So I'll go ahead and click, come up here. And this guy, the little cube right there that's gray, this is zoom extents. And zoom extents is very, very handy for those that are new to getting into working with 3D for the simple fact that it's very easy to get lost.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's what I mean. Where'd my objects go? Zoom out. Zoom in. Zooming. I'm lost. Okay. So now all we need to do at any time is come over here to zoom extents, and what this will do is basically frame up your scene. So if you do happen to wander off in your virtual world by dollying your camera too far away or panning it or whatever, then all you need to do is simply go in there and zoom extents, and that will bring it back out.
Cool. So it's actually taking all of the objects in your scene and making sure that they fit into the active viewport.
That's correct.
Very cool.
Okay, so we also have another thing in here that's very handy, and that is if you want to zoom in on just one object that you may be working on. So to do that, all we need to do is go about selecting an object, click on the flyout right there, come up here to the cube that's white, boom, and there you go.
Oh, that's very nice.
So now if I select on the sphere, come back down here to this viewport, and then click, see how we've just zoomed extents just to the selected object.
That is very handy.
And this is really nice. I mean, if we were, don't worry about what I'm doing right now because I'm about to do some fancy stuff. But if I made this into an editable poly, came in here and selected a few vertices to work on, and then did zoom extents on them, now what's going to happen is I'm going to zoom into that one given little area. Okay? So, definitely a handy thing to have. So let's go ahead and go back into object mode.
Okay.
Zoom back out. Now, in regards to zoom extents, there is one thing that can get beginners into a little bit of trouble and get them confused, and that is what happens when you start having objects that are really far away.
All right.
So let's come over here back into the Create panel and come over here to Light, and let's make an Omni Light, and let's move this guy a long ways away. Because, you know, generally you're going to have a bunch of lights in the scene, and, you know, it's quite common to have some lights, you know, far away.
Sure.
Now, if I come back down here, and let's say I'm lost again, and I need to go ahead and do a zoom extents, this is now what I'm going to see. And perhaps I don't want to see this. Perhaps I don't want everything being made to fit inside this perspective view, but everything's so small because my scene is so large.
Oh, I see.
Just imagine that there is a big bounding box around every single thing in your scene. Well, one of the cool features about 3ds Max is that you can go in there and you can tell an object to basically be ignored by this zoom extents feature.
That's very nice.
So to do that, all I need to do is simply right-click on an object, and then I get what is known as the quad menu. And from inside the quad menu, all I have to do is come down to Properties, and this is going to give me my Object Properties dialog box. And from inside here, I can simply come down to Ignore Extents up under the Display Properties group.
Oh, check it out.
Tell it to ignore extents, tell it OK, and then simply come back over here, do a zoom extents, and look at that. It has now ignored that light out.
That is very handy.
It is handy. Okay, so moving right along from there, we've got zoom extents with, what do you know? We've got a little grid behind it, right?
So that would be zoom extents for all 4 viewports.
Bloop. For all, absolutely. And right now they're all over there, so let's just go ahead and come in here and get this all messed up like such. Come down here, and there we go. Zoom, 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 zoom.
Very cool.
Okay, so moving on down from there, the next thing we're going to run into is a region zoom, and what the region zoom will allow us to do is just basically marquee an area that we'd like to zoom into. Let's go ahead and grab that again. An area that we'd like to zoom into, like such.
And it actually zooms into it.
And boom, zooms in on that one as well.
Very
and
cool.
That icon will stay as I come over here to different views, but watch what happens to this icon when I come back to the perspective view. It changes. This is because we're going to be affecting the field of view.
So this would actually be like physically zooming a camera as opposed to dollying it in and out.
That's correct.
Cool.
Okay. All right, so moving right along from there, if I come over here, I've got a little hand. This is my pan icon. So if I come up here, you can see I'm simply panning around, panning, and panning.
All right.
Physically moving my camera there. Well, when we actually have a camera that we're looking for through and we do this, we're actually moving the camera over. So it's like we're dollying.
Okay.
Okay? Or trucking the camera over. So now let's go ahead and move on over to the Arc Rotate. And Arc Rotate's going to allow us to come in here and simply rotate around our objects. look at the top, we want to look at the bottom, maybe move around to the back. Please be careful if you do this in a orthographic view. This will end up giving you a user view like such. It's going to look kind of like a 3D view, but it is still an orthographic view.
You'll notice the grid lines don't converge out into the distance.
That's right.
So it's actually still an orthographic view, but it's actually skewed into an angle now.
Yeah, so this is uncool. I always advise not working like this. If you want to rotate around stuff and see it in 3D, work in your perspective view.
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that. Okay, and the final one that I want to talk about in this lesson is the min-max toggle. And what it's going to do is simply take whichever viewport is active and maximize it or restore it back.
Okay.
Now, the hotkey for that is Alt-W, and that's going to take this full screen. Alt-W again will take it back.
Very cool.
Okay? So, we can see how, I mean, it's handy, and you're going to be doing that quite a bit as you go cruising around.
Most definitely.
All right, the next thing I want to talk about is our grid. Okay, being able to turn the grid off can become a very important thing because from time to time you will see that it just simply gets in the way. To do that, all I need to do is hit G. Or, at this point, it also allows me to introduce something new, and that is the fact that each of these labels in the viewports can be right-clicked on to give you a menu, and then from inside this context menu, I can come down to Show Grid, and I can turn it off from there as well.
Very nice.
Okay, so let's go ahead and turn it back on. Now, this brings us into the next group of things that I'd like to talk about, and that is the way that the geometry is shown to you inside your viewport. Right now, you can see that we've got some different stuff going on. We've got shaded objects here where we've got wireframe objects going on in all of my orthographic views. Well, all we need to do is simply right-click, and you can see right now that I've got Smooth plus Highlights active for what I'm seeing over here in my perspective view, but over in the left view, I've got just wireframe. So we can come in here, we can change this to wireframe if we wanted to. We can come down here to other, and we get different things that we can choose from. Perhaps we just want to see it smooth without highlights, so there's no shininess going on back over here, where we do have shininess going on if we view this smooth with highlights. So coming on down, we've got, if we want to see it with no smoothing turned on, so we can actually see all of the faces of this particular object. Or all objects in the view, actually. And this is with highlights. We can see it without highlights. And there's just a bunch of different things. We can even go as far as viewing it as just a bounding box if we happen to be running on some sort of ancient technology.
Primitive computer.
That's right. And our computer is running nice and slow. This can be really handy. So let's go ahead and right-click, and let's go ahead and turn this back over to Smooth Highlights. A hotkey that you're going to be interested in knowing, though, is going to be the F3 key, because it will allow you to quickly toggle back and forth between wireframe and Smooth plus Highlights.
Very nice.
Okay. Another thing, before I get too far away from talking about the navigation, and I'm going to kind of couple navigation with being able to change things over to just a bounding box, and that is if I wanted to use a hotkey, if you will, for rotating or arc rotating around this view, all I need to do is hold the Alt key down, press the middle mouse wheel down, and now I can rotate around without coming down over here and activating the arc rotate tool.
Very nice.
Now, why am I bringing this up now? Simple. You saw how just a second ago, if I wanted to, I could come up here, come down to Other, and say I only want to view bounding boxes, because I'm running old technology or whatever, and I want to speed, the viewport up or whatever it may be.
Right.
Well, something else that you may be interested in, perhaps your viewport draws fine, but if you're doing a lot of rotating and that's going to start slowing things down, then adaptive degradation override might be something that you would be interested in. And we can get to this by coming up here to Views and coming down here, and there she is, Adaptive Degradation Toggle. I can simply click it. It looks like nothing has happened. But now, if I wanted to rotate around this view, the moment I start rotating, what happens is 3ds Max automatically turns all objects into bounding boxes, so I've got a very fast rotate. Okay?
That's very nice. So it makes your rotations a lot smoother, so you can more precisely rotate around your scene.
That's right. It's very little that Max is having to draw at that point.
Very cool.
Go ahead and hit O on the keyboard, which is my hotkey for that, and you'll see now everything's staying smooth shaded with highlights as I rotate around.
Slick.
Check this out, Zach. Isn't that cool?
Oh, that is cool.
I'm not even using my mouse, guys. While I've got the arc rotate active, I can also come down to my arrow keys, and I can use those down, up, left, and right. And if that's too slow for you, you can even hold the control key down, and you'll notice that it's going to give you a lot faster mobility.
That's really cool.
Okay, so that's just a tip. I'm just throwing it out there.
It's just something random.
Just some
cool.
extra stuff, but cool stuff. Okay, so going back over here, right-clicking back into the menu again, we're going to cruise on down. Edged faces. Edged faces is something that becomes very handy. We'll be talking about this in later VTMs quite a bit, but it's a way to simply turn on all of the segments, if you will, all of the geometry that makes up that particular object that you're working with.
Okay.
So now we can see all of the edges that construct this sphere.
Like a combination of wireframe and smooth plus highlights.
It is. Okay, and it's very handy.
Cool.
So hotkey for that one, definitely worth knowing. That's going to be the F4 key. So I'll just hit F4 to turn it off, F4 to turn it back on.
Nice.
Okay. Let's go ahead and right-click again. Come on down. We already saw Show Grid. Show Save Frames is something we'll be getting into later on down the road. But basically, it's going to put a series of rectangular boxes up in that particular viewport. And this is when you're rendering out for, let's say, like NTSC, and some of your final rendered images are going to get chopped off when played back on a television set because you're not going to get the entire thing. Then you're able to come in here, turn this on, and basically know where to keep your titles at, where to keep your action at, etc.
Cool.
Okay? But we'll be talking about that more later. So let's just go ahead and turn that back off. Right-click, and let's just jump on down. Viewport clipping. Viewport clipping is pretty nice. This is interactive viewport clipping, where if you wanted to, basically what this means is if you have a really dense scene with a lot of objects in it, you may be interested in using this because it will help speed this viewport's interaction up when you're working with various navigational tools. And what we can do is we can come in here and we can control. Let me get this to keep coming on down. And a little bit forward.
Just got to drag in a straight line, Buzz.
Yeah. There we go. What's going to happen is this is our far clipping plane right there, and you'll notice that if we pull this down just a little bit further, basically the computer is going to cut everything off after a certain distance right there. Okay.
That's
so
nice. I
rotate
really like
around
that.
it. As I start rotating out, let me see if I can rotate out a little bit smoother here. Look at that. Everything just kind of starts to fall off, and as I continue going forward, things will suddenly start coming into view, almost like they're just coming out of the fog, if you will. And we can just go ahead and take this, and let me see if I can drag in a straight line now. We also have a near clipping plane as well. If I wanted to start bringing this one up, you'll see how that's going to start cutting off from the front. So now we can actually see into the sphere, or as we go forward, let's go a little bit smoother here, we can start chopping into our box over there.
Wow.
Okay, so let's go ahead and come back up here to perspective. We'll go ahead and turn that off. And cruising on down, texture correction is going to be something we'll talk about a little bit later. Deals with pixel interpolation and perspective view, something that most people don't have to worry about these days because it's really relevant when you're working with software rendering for the viewports, but most of us nowadays are working with Direct3D or OpenGL, so it's always on by default.
Sure.
If I can come down here and disable a view, this is something that's really nice. You'll notice now that it says perspective/disabled. Doesn't look disabled to me. But watch this. If I was to come over here and go to my modify panel, which we'll be talking about a little bit later on, and come in here and grab a series of vertices. Let's go ahead and rotate around so that I can see what's selected. Yeah, right about there. And I start moving these guys. Look at my other viewports. They're moving in those viewports as well, but they are not moving in the perspective viewport because it is no longer active. It's no longer alive, if you will. It's been temporarily disabled from updating any information that's being provided in other viewports, and this will significantly speed things up when you're working with very complex scenes. Now,
so can you manually update?
Well, if I just come down here and simply click, activate that viewport, boom, it redraws, all is good.
Very cool.
And the hotkey for this is D, so you notice I just hit D, it turned it off, D turns it on. So I can just quickly cruise around, disable these views, and then come up here. Now my computer's real fast, and it's not having to worry about redrawing this and all these other viewports.
Yeah, that's really helpful with this really old computer you're running.
Yeah, gotta love dual Xeon 3.02 gigs. Well, anyways.
3.06.
Oh, 3.06. I don't know where I keep going in that.
2 gigs of RAM, 200
yeah, maybe
gig
that's
hard
it.
drive.
Yeah, so
Such
slow.
a slow computer.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and right-click to come back in. Now, here's an area that you guys are going to be working quite a bit, and that's up under the Views menu option right here. where you can take any of your viewports and change them to other viewports. If we'd like to perhaps change this one over to a front view, well, it's now a front view. We've got two different front views, one that's zoomed out a ways and one that's zoomed in. Whoop-de-doo, no big deal. Okay, they're completely independent of one another. Go ahead and come back down here to views again, back, top, just there's so many of them. We can even come down here if we wanted to, and we're not going to talk about these right now, but I can throw a schematic view in there if I wanted to, okay?
All right.
And then all I need to do is simply just come up and right-click in any place where I get the little hand icon, and then I can come back down and change it to something else.
Very nice.
Okay, so yeah, definitely nice. There's also hotkeys from switching between the different views. Like if I wanted to go to a front view, I could hit F. If I wanted to go to a left view, I could hit L. Be careful, R used to be going to a right view, but now R is for scale. We'll be talking about that in the transform section. And if you go and take a look in your hotkey setup, which we can get to quickly by coming up here to the keyboard shortcut override toggle and right-clicking on it, you can go ahead and come down over here and you'll find your right view, and the right view is not assigned. So if you want to assign it to a hotkey, it's very easy to do.
Very nice.
Thought I'd point that out. Just another little tip, if you will.
Why, thank you.
So you're very welcome. So quickly get back to perspective. I'll just hit P, back into perspective view. If you do happen to have a camera in the scene, let's go ahead and take a camera. I'll create a target camera real fast, like such. And let's say I want to look through this camera. With the camera selected, I can go ahead and come down here and simply hit C, and I am now looking through camera 01.
Nice.
And if I come in here now and start trying to manipulate this thing, like by pressing my middle mouse button down as I'm doing here, and just panning around, you'll notice that my camera is indeed physically moving. If I go to truck this guy back out and forward, just physically moving around. Okay?
Very cool.
Another handy thing to know. Go ahead and hit P to go back into a perspective view so that we are no longer in the camera, and I will right-click to get out of that particular tool in viewport navigation controls. Another thing that you may find interesting is that you can hit the V hotkey to bring up a little viewports menu, and from inside this menu you can select front view, back view, top, bottom, left, right, perspective. There's all sorts of different views that you can select. Just simply click. There you go. Again, it's the V key. Okay? All right, so let's see. Anything else we want to cover real quick before we get out of this? Coming down, let's see. Undo view change, redo view change. Yeah, that's definitely an important one.
Especially if you accidentally tumble an orthographic view.
If I rotate this around like such, and I don't like this, I can do a Shift-Z to undo that.
Cool.
Okay? So if I right-click up here, I can also get to undo and redo.
All right.
Okay. So let's go down to Configure real quick. Configure is going to bring up a dialog box that's going to allow me to do all sorts of things. In fact, just about, or actually everything you just saw in the menu that just popped up a second ago when I right-clicked on the viewport label, except the neat thing about having this dialog right here is that I can affect active viewport only, which is what was happening when I was right-clicking on these and working inside that menu. All viewports, all but the active. So if I wanted to make them all, well, let's say all smooth plus highlights, I can come down here and say, do this to all viewports. Yeah, thank you very much. And
nice.
they're all that way. So that's definitely a handy feature. Let's go ahead and come back in here and let's see, what else? Render options, disabling views, disabling textures, the texture correction option. There's a whole bunch of different things. Default lighting, it goes on and on and on. Our perspective user view, if we want to change our field of view. All right, so moving on over. Oh, transparency. Let's go ahead and talk about this real quick. It's kind of outside of the scope of what I wanted to talk about, but it is kind of nice to know just in case anybody gets freaked out with anything. I'm going to hit F3 on these guys just to go ahead and switch them back over to a wireframe. Come into my perspective view, and I'm going to open up what is called the material editor, and I'm just going to simply drag and drop a material on this object, and then I'm going to come down here to opacity, and I'm going to turn this opacity way down. We're talking about right there.
Okay.
That looks kind of rough.
Yeah.
Okay, just a bunch of splotchy little dots, if you will, representing transparency for this object. Well, if I right-click over here, I can come down to transparency, and we've got three different things that we can choose from. Simple, which is a very simple algorithm that's used to represent the transparency. So you can indeed see through it with this. It's just, you know, it's just the quality of the transparency. It's very low.
Okay.
Right-click again, go ahead and come back down to transparency and turn it to best, and look at that.
Ooh.
So much smoother, much nicer. Again, it all comes down to if your viewport starts to get real slow, there's all sorts of ways that you can look at speeding it up.
All right.
Show with bounding boxes, the degradation override, go in here and change your transparency if you got a lot of transparency going on. If you want to, you can even turn transparency off altogether. So even though this object is indeed transparent, it's not going to represent that fact inside the viewport itself.
Cool.
So let's go ahead and cruise back down. We'll just put it back on simple, just, for demonstration purposes.
Right.
And I'll just go ahead and drag another material over here just so that we have no transparency going on in the scene whatsoever.
Awesome.
All right, so go ahead and right-click, come back down here to configure, and layouts was the next thing that I wanted to talk about. All right, up under layouts, you'll see that we've got all sorts of different ones that we can choose from. We got like 14 in total. So if we wanted a viewport that looked like this with the top, front, left perspective, hey, go for it. No big deal. You guys already know you can drag the bar out down here, get it the way you like. All is good.
Very nice.
Everything, though, continues to work the way in regards to navigation, display inside the viewport, etc. So go ahead and right-click, come back down here. Just find the one that's right for you. I work over here in 4View most of the time, but hey, that's just me.
Right.
And with that, I'm thinking that that's about everything that we needed to talk about in this lesson that kind of gives you just a quick ride through the world of viewports. Just the important things as a quick recap now to remember is, one, you've only got one viewport that can be active at a time. And that viewport, we know it's active because it's got a giant yellow border around it. If you are in auto key, you will notice you have a giant red border around it. But you've always got some sort of colored border that indicates which one is currently active.
Sure.
We saw that it's a good idea to middle click often to switch other views just so that you don't deselect or cause any other possible, little errors.
Right.
Like accidentally moving something if you got an object locked.
Exactly.
We saw that we can resize these if we want to, and that we can restore that. We talked about all the different ways of navigation down here. Biggest thing, though, you have a mouse with the middle wheel. You can press it down to come in here and quickly just simply pan around, or you can hold the Alt key down and you can quickly tumble around like such. Okay. You can also roll the wheel to zoom in and roll it backwards to zoom out. I just say that because we use that a lot. We saw F3 will toggle between a wireframe mode and a shaded mode. We also saw that F4 would turn on edged faces to kind of give you a combination of both shaded and wireframe at the same time, which again becomes very handy later on when we get into modeling. So let's go ahead and toggle that back off. And with that, that's going to wrap up everything I want to talk about with viewports.
Awesome.
All right, so thanks for putting up with me.